Portfolio Composer, episode 180.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
I just think that, relationships are key. So being as personable as you can in your emails and all of your communication is very important. Being, not taking anything personally. You're going to hear no a lot. We hear no a lot too. I think everyone does who works in a creative field. And being able to sort of roll with that, it says a lot about you as a person, and it will make people want to work with you again.
This episode is sponsored by Dorko, the future of scoring. Dorko is the music scoring software of the 21st century, allowing you to write, publish, and play back music notation to the highest professional standards. Created by the world's foremost experts, Dorko marries art, engineering, and AI, resulting in scores of unparalleled balance, warmth, and beauty. Visit dorko.com/TPC to download a fully functioning 30-day trial version of the software. Hello, and welcome to the Portfolio Composer. I am your host, your coach, and your teacher, Garrett Hope. And today is a special interview because I'm getting the opportunity to speak with a music supervisor. And this is one of those mysterious roles that is involved with nearly every single media project that you can ever imagine. Whether you know it or not, if you have experienced music in TV, in video, in movies, in games, there has been a music supervisor involved with the project. So if you are interested at all in media composition, this interview will be very valuable for you. So I'm super excited to introduce you all to Liz Lawson. Welcome to the Portfolio Composer, Liz.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Music supervisor Liz Lawson has helped shape the sound of over a dozen features and multiple sessions of both scripted and unscripted television. She recently wrapped Chris Paul's Chapter 3, a docuseries for ESPN featuring artists like Jay-Z, Andra Day, and Grammy-nominated rapper Rhapsody. Currently, she's hard at work on the 6th season of VH1's Black Ink Crew and features Eat Brains Love, Patrick Fabian and Jack Canaval, and Support the Girls, which is Regina Hall and Haley Lou Richardson. Liz, that's awesome. I was checking out your IMDb page and your personal website, or your business website, I guess, and everything I could to learn more about you, and you have quite the resume. But before we get started, can you help me understand exactly what a music supervisor is and the role you play in bringing media to life?
Absolutely. Generally speaking, a music supervisor is someone with broad musical expertise. And also, that's the creative side, but you also need the business side, which is the deep knowledge of music licensing and negotiation. So it's basically the person who's working with the director or producer of a film, like you said, advertisement, television show, trailer, promo, video game, etc., who acts as a liaison between the creative and the business ends of the process.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never thought about it like that before. So if the composer is kind of the creative side and the producer is the business side, you're helping bridge the gap.
Exactly. I like to think about a music supervisor as someone who can speak both languages. We can interpret, and this has happened to me before, where I have a director or producer who doesn't really have a music background. So they bring in a music supervisor, not only to help with the creative, syncs for source music in the project, but also to help them speak to the composer and understand the composer. It's sort of, we act as an intermediary between those two sides of the brain almost. Because we do deal with the business side of things a lot, but I think a lot of music supervisors grew up playing music, or at least understanding music in a way that someone who's purely a business person might not.
Okay, I get it. I've worked on enough projects to know that the language can be a barrier. And that's part of what you're alluding to, because these directors and producers who are visionary and creating a visual product know kind of what they want, but they don't know how to say it in musical terms. So I find that I'm often interpreting, and it seems like you do that too.
Absolutely. Yes, that's absolutely happened to me many times on projects. It's great to work with directors and producers who do have a vision for the music and the composition, but it's interesting to work with people who don't, because then you're really helping to shape that sound and also helping to get the composer to understand what the director and producer is thinking. Yeah.
Do you have any instances that are outstanding in your memory? And without naming names, can you describe some of these communication things?
Yeah, I mean, I worked on an indie a few years ago that was a great film, and while it was being cut, it sort of changed from one movie to another. It was really my first experience seeing how much the edit can create the voice of the film. So it turned into something that it wasn't in the script, really, at all. And so the composer who was brought on board, who's awesome, and I love him so much, and he had worked with this director before, and she's amazing too. It was almost like she had explained so succinctly what she originally wanted that when it changed, she was having trouble verbalizing that to him. So we spent a lot of time in his studio working on different cues that he was creating, and just sort of, she would say something that she was thinking, and I could understand what she was saying, and it helped to have me there because I could serve as like that person who could put it into musical terms for him.
And you said that it's important for a music supervisor to have a musical background. What is your musical background?
Yeah, I think that it is. I grew up playing the piano. My mom was a piano teacher when I was little. So I grew up sitting on her lap watching her give piano lessons. So when I was about 5, I sat down at the piano and just could kind of play. I had just absorbed it, I think, which was pretty cool. So I grew up playing the piano. I've been playing since I was little. When I was in elementary school and high school, I played the clarinet. And I can read music. I've taken many, many music classes. So, I understand that side of it. I would never call myself a composer by any stretch of the imagination. And composers are like, I'm in awe of composers. But, I think that I do understand at least a minimal amount of what work goes into what composers do.
Do you think that's true across the board for music supervisors, that they have that kind of experience?
Maybe, yes. Generally speaking, I do think so. Most music supervisors I know have at least a little bit of a music background. And it might not even be playing music. It might be that they were, a music promoter and learned a lot about music and bands that way, or they worked in music PR, or, there are lots of different facets of music that can really teach you about it outside of just purely like simply playing instruments.
Well, I would hope they would have that kind of experience.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think that it really does lend a different angle to the job rather than just being somebody who, likes music, which is a good qualification, of course. Liking music is important, but, understanding the intricacies of music and chords and, the depth of sound that different instruments can create, I think is pretty important when you're working on film and TV, especially.
Right. Now, how long have you been doing this kind of work?
I have been working music supervision in one aspect or another for about 7 years now.
Okay. And how'd you get into it?
I moved to LA about 7 years ago. At the time, I was working in music publicity, and before that, I worked in music journalism. And when I moved here, I was kind of just burnt out from doing publicity. It can become a little bit of a grind, and I love writing, but publicity is not necessarily the most creative writing. It's more of a business writing, press releases and that sort of thing. So when I moved here, I was a little bit, I was kind of looking for something new. And a friend who worked in post-production, was the one who mentioned music supervision to me as like something was even a career. I kind of knew it was. Obviously, I knew there was someone behind the soundtracks I grew up loving. But, even 7 years ago, it wasn't a role that a lot of people knew about. I think that's become less and less true these days. But back then, it was sort of a hidden job. So I moved here. I started looking into music supervision. 6 Feet Under is my favorite music show. So I looked up who was the music supervisor of 6 Feet Under, and Gary Calamar and Thomas Golblick. And I happened to reach out to Gary. That was just the guy who I don't know, I picked him. I guess I liked how he looked. And and he's a KCRW DJ, which I thought was awesome. I had heard his show. And so I sent him this like totally cold email, like just out of the blue. And I was like, I think you're so cool. And, it was like a fan letter. I sounded like a teenage girl, I think. And I don't think music supervisors get very many of those. So he wrote back and was like, I would love to talk to you. So I ended up talking with him. And then eventually, I think he liked what I had to say. And he eventually brought me into his home office. Then I met with him and his partner and ended up working with them for about a year.
Wow. Well, what's funny about that, Liz, is because you were a fan and because you kind of showed your love of what he's done, your appreciation of the work, that probably opened the door for you. If you had just written and said, I'm interested in becoming a music supervisor, can I intern with you? He may not have responded.
I think that's totally true. I think, you get those emails that are just copy and pasted, and they don't have that same personal feel to them. And it's funny, actually, that you say that, because while I was working with him, he said to me one day, he was like, you didn't send that note to like 50 other music supervisors, right? And I was like, no, you were literally the only person that I emailed. And he was like, okay, I thought so. I just wanted to make sure. So, I think he could tell that it was really coming from the heart. And I really was like a fan of his, and I still am.
I have so many questions at this point. So I'm going to try to remember them all, but let's start here. You were doing professional PR work, and you now transition into music supervision. What of those PR, marketing, branding skills did you take and find helpful as a music supervisor?
Well, I think the number one would be sort of marketing yourself. 80% of my job is doing my job, but 20% is really hustling to find new jobs.
New jobs for yourself or new jobs for your clients?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
For myself these days. And I think I took the skills that I had built doing PR, hustling for, stories for my clients and interviews for them, and thought about how did I do that back then? Like what avenues did I take to put these people in front of new publications? And then I thought to myself, well, how can I do that for myself now? So that's a big one that really translates. PR is obviously very business oriented too. So a lot of the organizational skills I learned doing PR, I translated, I brought into my music supervision work, because a lot of music supervision is being organized. You have to create grids to track different songs and budgets, and whether things are cleared properly, and who's the writer on, different songs. And being able to build those grids and share them with other people and make sure that all the information is there and being updated regularly is definitely something that I started learning when I was doing PR.
I think that's really interesting that the way you framed the marketing skill was about getting in front of your audience, which is a common term in marketing, right? And I teach that here at the Portfolio Composer as well, as identifying your audience and then getting your music in front of them. And you're doing that too as a music supervisor, saying, hey, I see you have this problem, I can help you. But you have to know who you're talking to, right?
Absolutely. And yes, doing your research is very important.
Sure. and I imagine for you, that's directors and producers, the people who are the business side behind the film.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the films particularly, a lot of the decisions for the creative team are made usually by the director. Sometimes it depends on how experienced the director is, whether the producers will, let them bring their team on. But yeah, I mean, with television, it's a lot of times it's the producers making those decisions. So yeah, it just depends on the project. But absolutely, those are the kind of people that I, as a music supervisor, am trying to put myself in front of.
So what about like networks? I mean, the major TV players are still producing, but they're also battling these kind of internet giants, right? Netflix and Amazon, who are pumping more money into content creation than just about anybody else. Do they have kind of a standard team the way, 100 years ago, Warner Brothers always had the same composers, the same music producers and directors?
I don't think so anymore. I think certain production companies do work with the same people over and over again. There is a production company I've been working with for, 4.5 years now, and I've worked on all of their stuff, and they're fantastic. And I know that a lot of other production companies work the same. I think the difference nowadays is a lot of times it's not coming from the networks or from, the Amazons or the Netflix, because they want something that's already sort of put together when they see it. On occasion, there is a music team internally at CBS, NBC, ABC, all of those broadcast networks. And they on occasion, I know, do recommend music supervisors if the producers of the show are looking. But like I said, a lot of times it does come from the production company. And I think that it depends on the project too. Certain music supervisors are known for certain things, like doing live television, like performances, or certain genres of music. There's a music supervisor who primarily works on hip hop stuff. So if you have a show or a film that's specific to a genre, you might go looking for that sort of person.
So even music supervisors have niches.
Yes, I think so. Some do. Across the board, no. I think one of the things that makes a lot of music supervisors very skilled is that we do have a deep knowledge of lots of different genres of music. But there are absolutely music supervisors that have, for whatever reason, whether they've gotten pigeonholed, like, actors have that happen to them too. But there are definitely music supervisors who primarily work in certain genres.
Sounds a lot like composers.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good comparison.
So you said that the production companies that you tend to work with a lot, and I guess you're speaking from personal experience, is that more because of the personal relationships you've built and less because you are a company person? You know what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. It's the relationships.
Okay.
Is if you work with somebody and you do a good job, a lot of people don't want to spend the time to find a new person. You've built trust with them, so they're like, well, why wouldn't we work with you again? Even sometimes production companies do bring in fresh people because they want a fresh voice. But, like I said, it's putting together a project takes a lot of different pieces. And if you can have one of those pieces pre-filled, I think that's like a comfort.
Oh, sure. And it becomes part of your team, right? We need to build teams around ourselves. Speaking of teams, I can see how a producer and or director, part of the team they would build around themselves would be the music supervisor and possibly even a composer, because that happens a lot, right? Think of Spielberg and John Williams. But the composer's team often is comprised of other people who can help him or her just create the music. Should a composer build relationships kind of like to be on a same team with music supervisors? I'm not sure I'm phrasing that question well.
Do you mean whether composers and music supervisors should build relationships?
Well, yeah, I think they should. It's more than that.
Yes,
it's more like, okay,
yes,
so my team is, let's say, and we don't work together, but just for the sake of this argument, that you are my music supervisor. And together we combine our efforts to bring projects to life. Does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I definitely I know music supervisors who have worked with the same composers more than one time. And one of the films I'm working on right now, actually, the director asked me to put together a list of composers that I've worked with who I thought could work for the film. So, I think it does happen sometimes, but the thing is, a lot of times, especially with composition, I think music supervision is a little bit more flexible because we do have the ability to, if we don't know about a certain genre, we can research it. And with composition, you can do that. But a lot of composers, I think with composition, you get more strongly pigeonholed. And if you don't have those demos that might reflect what you could potentially do, a director is going to hear your old stuff and think, well, this isn't right for my project, even if you do have the skill set to create something new. So he might, even if a music supervisor is recommending that composer, that director might bring on somebody else who he thinks could more shape the sound into something that he's looking for a little bit more.
So what are some best practices, Liz, for a composer to build relationships with music supervisors?
I think networking is always a good thing. The Guild of Music Supervisors has just shifted their membership criteria a little bit. And now we have a category called Friends of the Guild. So those are the people who might not be music supervisors or coordinators, but who work in music and who are just interested in learning more about music supervision. And that category will be invited to networking events and have the ability to, get in touch with music supervisors a little bit more easily, I think. So, networking events are always good. I don't think that there's any harm if you like somebody's work in reaching out to them via email as well. At the very least, it's flattering to the person. I don't think anyone's going to be insulted by that. So I think, that could potentially be a good way of getting in touch. Really, though, I think face-to-face is always the best. So if you can find a networking event where different music supervisors will be, that's the best way to do it.
Cold emails are okay, I'm assuming, because you just said that, but there's got to be best practices for emailing music supervisors as well. What have you seen, speaking from your own experience, that composers do that shoot themselves in the foot, that you don't even open the email or it's an automatic delete? What should we avoid?
Oh, man. Well, I think one of the things that drives me a little bit crazy is when someone, I'd love your feedback. That's putting the pressure, a pressure on someone that you don't even know to give you something. So, I think I get it. I know that people want feedback for their work, and it would be fantastic if every person had the time to do that. But, saying feedback is pretty vague it's a pretty general word. So the other person might not even know what you're asking for specifically. Also, we get so many music emails that if we took the time to respond and give feedback to every single one, we wouldn't have any time to do our actual jobs.
Right.
That's one. Another thing is knowing if you're pitching a song rather than yourself as an individual, knowing who has ownership over the song, who your co-writers might be, how much each of you own of that song, who the publishers are. That's very important.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that point? If I have a co-writer or there are multiple ownership stakes in a piece of music, is it important for me to have those cleared before I reach out to you? Like to say, I already have permission to send this track or whatever?
I mean, not necessarily, although that's nice if you have the co-writer sign off and you say, I have ownership, I can admin, 100% of the master and sync of this song. That's lovely. It's not necessarily necessary though, but I think having communication with your co-writers and, if one of your co-writers all of a sudden hops onto a major label, knowing that, because that's obviously going to change the price point of the song significantly. Having a base knowledge of who owns what in your music is vitally important, because we occasionally get pitch tracks and people say, I know this will clear in your budget, and then it doesn't. And then you find out, there's a writer who's on Universal and you're like, what? And the director already likes the song. And, you get into these situations where you think, well, why would I ever work with this person again? Because they're creating more work for me. And that's an essential thing. Try not to create more work for anyone that you're trying to work with, like that's not a good way of making a long-term relationship.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I would think the composer should aim to make things as easy as possible for you to say yes. Exactly.
That is 100% true.
But does that happen regularly?
Yeah, absolutely. There are absolutely people who make life easier. That's why, a lot of music supervisors have the same licensing people or sync people that they work with over and over again, because those are the people who, without fail, know what they're talking about and know when they say that something's going to happen, it happens.
They deliver.
They're
consistent.
Exactly.
How so interesting. Okay, so you were kind of forming a thought for another thing that composers do that we shouldn't do, and I interrupted you. Do you remember where you were going with that?
There are a lot of different things I could say. Another one that I've thought of, that I've mentioned recently to someone else is that if you have a link in your email to your music, you should make sure it doesn't expire. There's nothing that's more of a bummer than going back into a month-old or several-month-old email and being like, oh, I want to hear this now, and then having it come up and be like, this link is expired, and you're like, well, just moving on. A lot of people don't take the time to reach back out and say, can you resend this to me? Because, it's a fast-paced industry. And when we want to hear something, we want to hear it immediately. And also, and this is something that I mentioned to a writer at a conference a couple weeks ago, and they were like, oh, that's a good idea. Making sure, and this would seem like it's very obvious, but making sure you have what genre of music you are sending in your email. Because I personally have a whole folder, like a huge folder of music submissions that I've gotten. And if I'm looking for something specific, I'll just do a search for the genre. And
really?
So you want to, yeah. That's the best way of looking through, upwards of 20,000 emails. So you being able to pull those up easily and having those keywords in your email is very important.
That kind of, it's almost the exact same thing as kind of tagging and the meta information if you go to a library,
yes.
right? But what happens when a composer says, this is indie folk, opera, children's choir? Something that's like, really? You put that all at the same time?
So I would say don't do that either, because nobody will have any idea what you're talking about.
But you've seen that, right?
Not too many times, but I have seen that, yes. I'd say, know what genre your music is. It's kind of like when you're writing a book. Like, you should know what category of book you're writing, what genre it is. And with music, you should know what it is. Even if you're creating something that is totally unique, it's still probably either rock or pop or, it's still falling under one of these headers.
As you've built this career over 7 years, what has been one of the most surprising lessons for you?
I I guess how much of the job is the business end of it. I think when people think about music supervision, the thing that they think about is like they're people that make cool mixtapes, which, is like, which is part of the job, sure. But also, there's a lot of my day is spent doing clearance and sending out search requests and doing random paperwork that I have to do for different films or television shows that different networks require. There's a lot of like back end stuff that people don't think about when, they originally, I think a lot of people don't think about when they get into music supervision.
What is one thing that you have always wanted to talk about, but no one ever asks you?
Let's see. I would say one thing would be, and this might be controversial, but one thing would be how much harder it is to work on. It's always interesting to me that when you're starting out, a lot of times, unless you like happen to start out with a big music supervisor who brings you up with them, which is lovely. But if you start out with a music supervisor and then go out on your own as a freelance person, a lot of times you end up working on lower budget projects at first. And it's so funny to me because those lower budget projects are actually so much harder to work on, in my experience, than projects that have more money, because you have to do so much more digging. You really have to like put your nose to the whatever and like really grind. It's a grind almost. You have to like know where to dig. It takes a certain skill set that when you have like a $500,000 budget, you don't necessarily need.
Right.
So, it's always been very interesting to me to think about that. And I think that some people don't take that into consideration when they're thinking about the smaller projects. The fact that when you have a $5,000 music budget and they want 12 songs, you are really having to be creative. And I think that's a great first learning experience for people, actually. Learning how to sort of be flexible and work around those tiny budgets is something that is vitally important and has really made the rest of my career maybe a little bit easier, because then when you're confronted with a giant budget, you're like, oh my God, like,
right.
This is great. Like, I can do whatever I want. So
speaking of budgets, I know Marvel is spending so much money on their soundtracks. I just recently rewatched Iron Man and then, Guardians of the Galaxy. And the Guardians of the Galaxy films have even a joke within the movie about how awesome this mixtape is that we're listening to. And they're like top 40 stuff from the last 80 years. What kind of budget are they operating on to pull that off?
Oh my God. Honestly, I don't know, but if I had to wager a guess, I would say, $10 million probably.
Just to clear the sync rights for those songs.
If I had to guess, I could be overestimating, but those are giant songs that they have in there.
Huge songs.
Marvel has so much money, I guess why not do it? Those music budgets are enormous, absolutely enormous.
And then they hire a composer on top of that.
Yeah, it's true. I know. It's insane.
Wow. So the range goes from zero budget to micro budget all the way up to, I guess, Guardians of the Galaxy, which, the soundtrack for that is fantastic.
Oh, fantastic. Absolutely.
Wow. Amazing. One of the things I did in preparing for this interview, Liz, is I went onto Facebook and I said to my audience that I was going to be speaking with you. And I asked my listeners for questions. So what questions do you have for a music supervisor? And I got some really good ones. Can I ask you some of these?
Please.
Okay. Other than good music, capital G, capital M, good music, and we don't really have to define that, what is the leading reason for hiring a composer or a sound person or an audio person?
I think really to give the project texture. I think of the source music as something that's fun and can move the story along for sure. But in a lot of projects, the composition is the thing that's so vital to the story. It really it creates that emotional depth that might not be there on the screen otherwise. And it's almost a good composition, I think, is something that sticks in your head, but also is almost so in line with the project that you almost don't notice it at times. So I think really giving the project another layer, a little bit more depth is the primary reason of hiring a composer.
Where do you go to find music?
It depends on the level of the price point, I guess. I have a lot of different places I go. I have publishers and labels that I've worked with over the years who I love, who I know will send me good stuff. I look on Spotify. There's a website called Hype Machine that I love that is sort of a blog conglomerate where they, will have the top songs that blogs are posting and how popular they are. That's a great one for discovering more indie stuff, more up-and-coming bands. And, Bandcamp is always good. CD Baby for more indie stuff as well. There's so many different sites on the internet these days that have great music. There's a blog called Indie Shuffle that I really like. They tend to have up-and-coming bands on there as well.
So it seems then that having really good keywords and meta information is critical to being found.
Yes.
Okay. Does having someone else submit materials on the composer's behalf, like an agent or a lawyer, improve the composer's chances of being considered for a project?
That's a good question. Sometimes, I would say.
Okay.
I know that's vague and not really a great... I would say sometimes because, it depends. If you have a relationship with that agent or manager, then it probably will, because you'll say, oh, I know this person. Of course I'm going to respond. If you don't have a relationship with them, sometimes not. Sometimes it's nice to get something personal from someone and, know that it's coming directly from the composer. I'd say the things the thing that could potentially improve chances are having it be pitched by someone that has a personal relationship with that music supervisor.
So you have to really know who knows who. Takes a lot of research.
Yeah, I know. And, that's the entertainment industry. It's so much it's so relationship based. And I know it can be a little bit frustrating at times.
Speaking about libraries or other resources, what really sets things apart? I mean, the difference between a generic library as opposed to a boutique library, things like that. How do these things differentiate themselves for you as a music supervisor?
Yes. I mean, I absolutely think of certain libraries for certain sounds. I think that the Extreme Music Library, for example, is very heavy into hip hop, and they have a lot of great hip hop vocals. There's one called Strike Audio that has a lot of hip hop, but it's more instrumental and a little bit more aggressive. And we use a lot of that on one of the shows I work on. I think different libraries are also known for different qualities, and it just depends on the composers that they're able to bring in. I think it's also important for a library to have that metadata in there. When you're importing cues in iTunes, a lot of times, how they look on your screen otherwise isn't how they get into your iTunes.
Right.
So being able to look at the song info is, that will help you figure out where you got it.
Liz, how do you like to receive communication from composers? You've already mentioned email, but is snail mail okay? Like if you actually received a letter with a CD, would that make a difference?
That's interesting. Maybe. Unless the person asked for my address, I might think it was a little creepy, but I think honestly, a CD probably wouldn't be the best way of sending anything, because I think a lot of people don't even have a way of playing a CD anymore.
Yeah.
I have an external CD drive, but I'd have to figure out where I put it. I think, honestly, I think these days email is really the best. And also, like I said, having those links in your email that are easy to access. If you're going to email somebody following up, there's no harm in following up. Just don't do it every day.
Is there a good time frame for following up? Like wait a week, 10 days or something?
I think like 2 weeks generally.
Okay.
10 days, 2 weeks, something in that range. A week is probably okay, but I think maybe some people would find it a little bit much. But honestly, really anything, I think anything over a week is okay.
Okay. And links are preferred to attachments, yes?
Yes, 100%. Attachments can come with viruses. They can also be gigantic and take up a lot of space in your email. Links are 100% preferred.
As someone who clicks a lot of links to listen to music, are there some links that work better than others? And what I'm really getting at here is composers have a limited amount of ways to put their music available online. So we can put it in a Dropbox folder and send you a unique link to that. We can put it on SoundCloud. There's all these other things. Are there some platforms that make it easier for you? Because I really believe the composer should make it as easy as possible for you to listen to it.
Yeah, I think that there are some platforms that, I think some of them are a little bit more user-friendly than others. Like there's a new one called Disco that a lot of licensing companies have started using. It's kind of cool. It has like a more unique look to it. I think you can sign up and also like transfer music internally in it. I always like Box because it's such a streamline. I'm a big fan of like the simplicity of it. That's what I use personally.
Okay.
I think Dropbox is okay. I don't love Dropbox, but it's good for, big stuff. Dropbox, my problem with Dropbox is, then you have to sometimes import it into your own computer, which then eats up space on your own computer, which is kind of a bummer. So I end up deleting some old stuff from there.
Right.
And stuff like WeTransfer is okay, but I don't know. It's just the platform kind of reminds me of a computer virus. I don't know why. So
okay.
I'd say like that's my least preferred, just because, I think that there are a little bit more sophisticated ways of sending your stuff than that.
All right. And you didn't mention SoundCloud.
Oh, I like SoundCloud too. Yeah.
Okay.
But as long as there's a link to download, I think that's an important thing to say. If you send your stuff, I think it's very important to be able it's important to have the other person give the other person the ability to download onto their computer so they can have it, like pull it and then listen to it later.
Oh, and when we upload to SoundCloud and other platforms, there is a way to turn off downloading. So you're saying make sure that can happen. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Definitely. Because also if I like it or if a music supervisor likes it, then they might want to send it to someone else. And it's a lot easier to do that if you can download it, put it in the playlist that you're making on, Box or whatever, and then send that link that way instead of having to send an entirely separate link for one song.
This is kind of a very time-specific question. We're having this conversation in the middle of December. So, for the last 6 weeks, holiday TV shows and movies are coming out, and we are in the holiday season. So as a music supervisor, when do you begin looking at and listening to holiday-themed music?
Honestly, we start getting holiday music as early as the summer. Because, scripted production schedules are lengthy. So licensing companies and composers will send, it's sort of like Christmas in August, like people will start sending stuff then. So when people are working on Christmas episodes in September, they have that stuff on hand.
So if I have this great holiday track, I should send it to you in July and August, not wait till December.
Yeah, I think so. Because if you send it right now, for reality, that would be great because, reality moves so quickly. that, I mean, I'm in the middle of production on a show that I'm working on that's reality. The first episode's already airing and we're still like working on episode 605. So it's crazy. But if you're sending it to someone who works in scripted or in film, absolutely the earlier, not too early, but like, yeah, midsummer is probably good.
Okay. And here's the last question, Liz. Does it make a difference if a composer is pitching bespoke music versus a song or a pre-composed track?
Make a difference? How so?
Well, like I could reach out to a composer and I could say, here's the music I've already written and it's available for licensing. I'd love for you to listen to it, but this is also kind of samples of what I can do. I would love to write custom music for this. I would love to be the composer for this project.
Right. I think it depends on what the person's looking for. A lot of times, well, it depends. Like if you're looking for something that you can pitch down the line to a director or producer, obviously the pre-composed music would be good. But if you are pitching yourself as the composer for a project, I think it's very nice to say, I'm more than happy to make some demos for this specific project, for the sound. Because like I mentioned earlier, a lot of demos that composers have on hand might not be specific to the project. And giving the director, giving them sort of the specific sound that they are looking for can really help them realize that you have the ability to do that.
So again, it comes back to doing some research. You got to know what the projects are, and you kind of really have to pitch for a project. You can't just say, I'm a composer in town, hire me.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think so. Each project is different, and compositions can kind of range from orchestral to like minimalistic. There's so many different kinds that if you pitch your orchestral stuff for like a social network kind of movie, it's just not going to work.
I just finished my first cue sheet for a feature-length film that I did. It was an independent film, and it's 90 minutes long, but it took me about 4 hours to fill out the cue sheet because you know how it works, right? They'll take a stem from this track and they'll layer it in with a stem from another track, and so I've got to individually list all this. And the recommendation I've received is to make sure you do your own cue sheets, or they may not happen. What are your feelings on that?
I hate cue sheets, but I think it's important for composers to do their own cue sheets for sure. I think some projects, if you have a project that's big enough, you'll have a music editor who their responsibility is to do the cue sheet. So if you're working on a project that is well enough put together, those cue sheets should happen, but there's no harm in doing it yourself and or following up with the person who you know is responsible for them to just kind of nudge them and make sure that they have done them. I do cue sheets. Well, I have someone who does them for me, but for the reality show I work on for VH1, our cue sheets are crazy because it's just completely wall-to-wall music. It's like 115 cues each episode, usually.
Wow.
And I get nudged by music libraries all the time to be like, can you send me the cue sheets that you have for, between these dates? Because they just want to make sure they're done and that all the info's on there properly. And that's normal. I don't mind that at all.
Yeah. Well, that's also how they operate. That's the residuals. If they don't file the cue sheet, there's no money.
Oh, exactly. Especially for, if you're working in a music library that has a gratis overall deal with a network, that is like, otherwise, like you said, you're not going to get any money from it. So those people absolutely should be doing their due diligence.
Can you point me towards some sort of resource for composers who have not negotiated sync fees or licensing fees before? Like where can we even begin? What price do we start with? Is there something, a book we can go to? Something?
That's the problem, is there really isn't a standard at all. I was on a panel at a conference a couple weeks ago, and somebody asked a similar question. they were like, recently I've gotten a couple quotes that seem lower than other quotes that I've gotten from other networks or other shows. And I'm not sure if this person's lowballing me, or if I should take it because it might set a standard that I don't want set. And the moderator of the panel was kind of like, as long as you think that the person is offering you as much as they can, you ask. I think it's totally normal to ask the budget of the project. The music budget is a normal question to ask. Not everyone will release them, but there's no harm in asking. And then you can sort of get an idea whether the quote that you're getting is something that is reasonable, or if it's like, completely very, very low. Because they're like I said, some projects have $5,000 as the music budget and some have $500,000 or more. And, you can probably discern from the network, the project, whether it's an indie film or a studio film, how much money is kind of floating around in the background.
I like the idea that it's negotiable, because I don't think there should be a set fee like there is a mechanical fee if you're going to, do a cover. But it's also so open-ended that unless you have experience or someone doing this for you, you don't really know what to ask.
I know. It's true. And that's why, as a composer, it's so important. As any musician, I think it's so important to learn about the business side of it, because then you at least start getting an idea of what to ask. You get an idea, like we keep going back to, doing your research is very important. Talking to other composers and seeing how much they may have gotten for similar projects, because that's the way you're going to learn. Everything is negotiable. And if you don't want to end up in a bad spot where you're being taken advantage of. I will say, though, that most music supervisors are people that want the musicians being used in their projects to get as much as they can possibly get. I don't know any music supervisor who's in it to sort of undermine the music. They want people to get paid. We want, we have budgets are falling, but we fight as much as we can to get the musicians what they deserve.
But sometimes we get pretty excited to jump on a project and we may undervalue what we're doing, and that could have long-term ramifications. And what comes to mind for me right now is Michael Jackson's Beat It. I just taught this, I teach the history of rock and roll class, and last week was the 80s. And so I was reading about, Eddie Van Halen, who gets asked by Quincy Jones to come and record this solo, right? He comes in and lays down this incredible solo, and he was so excited to be a part of this project, he said he did it for free. And this would be a major budget thing. And how many times does that song get played and sold, and he doesn't get anything after?
Yeah. I mean, it's true. And that's why when you're licensing for a price that's lower than what you want to set as your standard, you can always say this is like a non-precedent setting price. That's what majors do. If they clear something for less than what is standard practice, they'll say this is a one-off, essentially, is what they're saying. We're doing you a favor in the hopes that, in the future you'll do us a favor, and that you'll respect the fact that this is not something that we'll do in the future.
Is there anything else you wanted to say to composers who want to write media or who might be interested in becoming music supervisors before we take a break for the lightning round?
I just think that, relationships are key. So being as personable as you can in your emails and all of your communication is very important. Being, not taking anything personally. You're going to hear no a lot. We hear no a lot too. I think everyone does who works in a creative field, and being able to sort of roll with that, it says a lot about you as a person, and it will make people want to work with you again.
I love it. Let's take a quick break and we'll come right back. This episode is sponsored by Dorko, the future of scoring. And we want to feature real Dorko users so you can know that real composers out in the world today are using Dorko to make their careers happen.
My name is Reginald Unterzehr. I am a composer, conductor, voice teacher, musician of a variety of sorts. It does absolutely everything I need, plus every time a new feature is released, it does it with depth and clarity that I have never seen in any programs to date. Right now, I think my favorite, I'm just finally figuring out the idea of flows. I'm deep into a multi-movement choral orchestral soloist project. And so there are certain aspects of that I had not explored at all and didn't really need. And now that I see how they work, it's going to be a tremendous help when I get into the rehearsal and distribution of scores phase and revisions phase. It just makes the way that flows are set up makes it a single document that works for all the different movements of it, and I'm loving that. The number one benefit is the fact that I believe this program has legs, that there's going to be updates that come out regularly. The team that runs it is a reliable, solid team. The people who own it are responsible and have a commitment to the musical community. This was my big problem with the platform that I left. It was like, this platform has been abandoned and I do not want to spend another cent on it. I definitely recommend Dorko. My number one thing is that it actually presents a path forward as my work continues. I am 62 years old. Learning a new program is daunting. I really like the way that the scores look. They just seem very natural. The spacings work so much better. The way that choral scores work now, the way that it works with lyrics, the way that it works with layouts. I went back to I was with a choir doing a piece that I had put together in another program 8-10 years ago. And they were asking me all kinds of questions about what is this note and what is that? Is that a tie? Is that a slur? Is that a this thing? And I was looking back at it and I was going, oh, yeah, they really fixed that problem, didn't they? Because I don't get those questions with Dorko. People look at the notes and they play the notes or sing the notes and it makes sense. They don't have to figure out what the program meant by it. I run into problems in rehearsals oftentimes when tracking the eye across the page confuses them rhythmically. And I have not had that problem at all with Dorko. Again, it seems to be, it gets out of the way of the interface between composers' intentions and musicians' reading. Rather than introducing barriers, it removes barriers. And I like that a lot.
The kind folks at Dorko have set up a special webpage so you can go and download a free 30-day trial copy of Dorko. So go and do that. I have been using the program and I'm absolutely in love with it. Go to dorko.com/TPC.
Welcome to the lightning round.
Liz, if you could turn back the clock, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
I would tell myself to get my shit together, honestly. That, I think that your 20s can be a time where you're either sort of searching or when you're really building your career. And I think, when you're 20, it's important to sort of take a beat and focus and say, what do I want right now? And a lot of 20-year-olds don't do that. And I wish I had known to do that when I was 20.
Yeah, me too. What is a personal habit of yours that you feel leads to your success?
Honestly, I think doing my due diligence, the research. When I have an interview with someone for a new job, I will research what they've worked on. I'll generally watch a couple of the things that they've produced or directed. I think that really lends itself to the other person knowing that I could potentially be the right person for the job.
And this is something I should have brought up long time ago, because you mentioned this earlier on in the interview, but you are pitching yourself for these gigs just as much as the composers are.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So knowing how to pitch yourself, how to market yourself, how to put yourself in front of the right audiences is key.
Yes.
So you grew up around the piano, you play the piano, you played clarinet. I played clarinet. But what is an instrument you've always wanted to learn to play and why?
When I was little, I also had a year where I played the violin and I quit. I don't think I liked my teacher. I think that was the reason. But ever since, I've wished that I hadn't. I would love to pick back up the violin. I think it's such a beautiful instrument.
Oh, it is. It's amazing. This next question is often the most difficult for people to answer because I'm asking for one composition that had a profound impact on you. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys tells a story about driving around LA. This would have been around 1962 when Phil Spector's Be My Baby by the Ronettes comes on. And he has to pull the car over because he's almost crashing. His mind is being completely blown by this song. I'm looking for those pieces that did that to you. Where did time stop? What music made your world change?
Gosh, there are so many.
Right.
But, I think a song like, first of all, my favorite sync that I've heard that really did that to me was in The Walking Dead. There was a moment where they played the Y Oak song Civilian. And that cut to the picture was just, it is so beautiful. And ever since when I hear that song, it sort of just gives me chills. I think it's just a really, really lovely song. And, I could go on forever probably.
Give us one more.
Okay. There's a great song, and this is a very sort of unknown one, I think, on the soundtrack for Pinero movie that has Benjamin Bratt in it. And it's called Look at the Moon, Carmen's by Kip Hanneron. And it is just, I heard it for the first time when I was in my 20s. And ever since, it is just the song I play when I want to relax. Like, I just think the song is almost eerie. It's just so beautiful. It reminds me of the night. I love that song.
So I'm always trying to broaden my listening experience. And right now I'm also working really hard to recognize people who historically don't get a lot of recognition. So can you name a piece of music or a performer that is minority or female that you think we should all get to know and listen to?
Yeah, there are so many. I mean, Heather McIntosh is fantastic. I don't know if you know her. She did the score for the movie Compliance a long time ago, which is, that score is really beautiful. And the movie is fantastic. If you have a chance, I would check it out. But she's done a lot of Sundance indies. She's very, very talented. She used to be, she used to play with a lot of bands. She played with a lot of Elephant Six bands, if you know them. They were sort of where Neutral Milk Hotel started.
Oh.
And so she has that background. She's also a cellist, which I love the cello. And that really lends that extra layer to certain compositions, I think, that she does.
Can you name a book that could benefit the personal, creative, or business lives of the podcast listeners?
Oh, absolutely. If you all don't know about Brené Brown, you should check out her books. Her book, Daring Greatly, is absolutely fantastic. I think it's honestly, it's life-changing.
Yeah, and everyone should watch her TED Talk too.
Oh yes, her TED Talk is also amazing. I mean, she's just I can't even say, she's an awesome lady.
She is. And a lot of composers are very cynical because we tend to have graduate degrees and we're smart. Right. And Brené Brown, because she gets labeled as self-help and it kind of seems like woo-woo psychology stuff, it gets written off. But she's legit. I mean, she's a PhD. She teaches at a university. This is not soft science. No, and not at all. But her books, but it's nice because her books are not approaching it from the super sciencey angle. They are incorporating science, but they're so readable. I highly recommend checking them out. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Where can people find you on the internet? And if you want people to reach out to you, which may happen, how can they do so?
The internet, you can find me. I have a website. It's vinylrulesmusicsupervision.com. And Twitter is another great way of finding me. It's Liz Lawson, but without the vowels. So it's LZLWSN. That's my Twitter name. And email, please do reach out. My email is liz@vinylrulesmusicsupervision.com. It is the longest email address that has ever been in existence.
Hey, then they have to really want to reach out to you, right?
Exactly.
Liz, this has been so valuable for me. I've learned a great deal in this conversation, and I hope that other composers do as well. So thank you so very much for your time today.
Thank you. This was fantastic.
This episode of The Portfolio Composer has been supported by Dorko, the new professional music notation and composition software from Steinberg. Dorko has been designed from the ground up to be a flexible and powerful tool. Whether you're a composer or arranger, a teacher or student, working in music engraving and publishing, or working in producing music for media such as film, TV, and games. Compared to other scoring programs, Dorko is fast, fluid, and efficient. Designed for comfortable use on a laptop on the go, but seamlessly scaling up to working on multiple large displays in the studio. It has a beautiful, modern, and uncluttered user interface that allows you to focus on your music. Dorko also embraces the traditions of the finest printed music and produces pages of such balance and proportion by default, you'll be amazed. You can bring music into Dorko from your existing software using Music XML or MIDI. And you can try Dorko out completely free of charge for 30 days by downloading a trial version from dorko.com/TPC. Try it today and experience the future of scoring for yourself.